I read this book and immediately made an appointment with my therapist.
Yeah, I know.
I read this book and went straight away to slap my pastor.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm with my brother John, as always, who is ensconced now again in the upper room of his home.
The upper room.
Yes. He has been, what would you call that? Like reestablished in the upper room?
Yeah, but as you can see, it's very vacant of anything. So I'm going to have to put some stuff on the walls, get some posters, inappropriate posters of like heavy metal Satan worshiping bands, I think.
Yes. And then that one, that Bo Derek poster from when we were kids, you know, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, where she's running on the beach.
Okay, anyway, we digress. See, we've only started and we've already digressed. But this is the podcast we have lovingly called This Is Not Church because, why not?
Why not?
I mean, really, when it comes down to it, when it comes to the end of the day, why not? Indeed. But we are honored today. We are really, really super happy to have a guest with us who is awesome. This is Chris Kratzer. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about him real quick. And we're going to jump headfirst into the conversation and see where it takes us, right? So Chris Kratzer is a former evangelical pastor, 20 plus years. He's the author of Leatherbound Terrorism in 2018 and Stupid Shit Heard in Church, November 2021. I didn't know how to say that and leave the asterisks in. So Stupid Heard in Church. I think that's an awesome title.
Listen, I had some podcast. I can't remember who it was, but I think about maybe a quarter of it was. They actually bleeped out all that I ever said.
All of that, really?
Yeah, because
we're going to double down and triple down and say it again. Stupid shit heard in church, which was November of this year. The focus of Chris's writing is one, being a voice for the spiritually oppressed, that they know they're loved and have one who stands in solidarity with them, and calling the evils of conservative evangelicalism. I can't even say it. It's so evil. Conservative evangelicalism out of the shadows. Chris is married with 4 children, and that is the most succinct bio I think I have read for any guest on the show.
Yeah.
So if John wrote it, kudos, John. If this is yours, Chris, kudos to you for brevity. As Shakespeare told us, is the soul of wit. So welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, man. It's great to be.
Yeah, glad to see you. I have actually followed you on Facebook for quite some time. So when your name popped up as a possible guest, I was like, oh, yes, at least there was some familiarity. I'm like, I know this guy a little bit. Just through his Facebook musings. I feel like we're cut from the same cloth in some ways. But Chris has a pretty heavy Facebook presence, which I think is always pretty awesome that people can navigate those waters, treacherous though they may be at times. But yeah, just beyond your bio, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe walk us through some of your faith journey a little bit. Get us kind of started on this conversation.
Yeah, so I actually started off as an ELCA guy, Evangelical Lutheran Church, and so when I graduated from college, I kind of had it for some reason set in my mind that I was going to become an evangelical Lutheran pastor, and I did all that. Went to the 4 years of seminary, and then pastored the first church down in Sarasota, Florida. Was there a couple years and a half, and then pastored another church because they were actually looking for somebody to help them transition from being a traditional church to a conservative church. And being young and naive, I thought that might be a great idea. But then actually what happened for me was I actually became very conservative. I stepped away from the ELCA probably about my 5th year in, and got connected with a conservative evangelical megachurch in Tampa, and got to be good friends with the pastor, and ended up actually starting a very modern in style church called Quest 419, but it was very Southern Baptist in the beliefs and everything. And so I did that for a while. You know, I was an evangelical guy for years, and finally came to the place where, man, I just started to be honest with myself and realizing that just does not work. None of it works, and it only makes you better at faking it. And I came to a real point of depression and anxiety in my life. And everything kind of just hit me at once. I actually came to a place pretty close to a suicidal mode, and I really had some health problems at the time. And, everything that was going on in terms of being a pastor and my own personal faith was just not working. All the things that conservative evangelicalism promises never came true. This dream of being the next Bill Hybels or, Ed Young, none of that ever came true. As much as I prayed, as much as I had sin management, all that kind of stuff that comes with the territory of being a conservative evangelical guy, none of it worked. It made me worse. I was less loving, less secure, not as good of a husband or father. And anyway, it just came to a head for me. And I took my wife upstairs to our room in the second floor of our townhouse that we were in at the time. Told her, listen, you need to leave and give the kids a better father, give yourself a better husband. I'm done. I can't take any of this anymore. And it had nothing to do with her, and it had nothing to do with the kids. It was just, where I was at in my faith. But then, just everything kind of came to that cliff. And thankfully, obviously, since I'm here, nothing ever happened in terms of the suicidal stuff, but it certainly caused me to totally re-examine my faith. And that was the process that over time transitioned me into where I'm at now, which is, I hate the terms of progressive and whatnot, but I guess it would be for your audience, just a more progressive, LGBTQ affirming and all that kind of stuff, pastor and whatever person. So, but it was a process. It didn't happen overnight, but here I am.
No, I think your story is so similar, as especially amongst pastors. Have you noticed that? I mean, it's one thing for I hate the term lay people, but fine, but for people who are not clergy to deconstruct, it's one thing. For people who are pretty firmly entrenched inside of evangelicalism, like to the point where that's where your livelihood is. So much of your identity is built up in there. So much of your own sense of self-worth is wrapped up in that thing. When that thing starts to come unraveled for us, man, it can cause an awful lot of issues. I've heard this from multiple people who are former pastors, that deconstruction was not the lighthearted, romp that some have, some claim it to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just sort of the wanton destruction of beliefs and doctrines. No, it came with a heavy cost.
Yeah, you don't really go into it intentionally. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to deconstruct the hell out of this thing. It deconstructed you. I mean, it takes you to the bone. And the only place you have left is really to just be honest about it and say, listen, this is crap. This is hell on earth to be a part of this. If you really wake up to what it's doing to you and the people around you, through you.
Yeah. Did you ever dabble in atheism? I've talked to a few friends of mine who were like, I'm willing to lay it all on the line. And that includes God, by the way. Like if just let it all go.
I think that, atheism is a very sacred thing. I mean, the person who is willing to, embrace that or allow their soul to journey in. I mean, I don't think I've ever really had atheism. I mean, I don't think there's been a time when I really, in my heart, in my faith, stepped away from Jesus in a sense. But I certainly did and do have atheistic aspects of my faith. I don't know if that makes sense. How you can hold those two things together, Jesus and atheism. I mean, and for me, bottom line is I just don't think, and this is going to be contradictory to an atheistic view, but I don't believe that you can go outside of what God can that God doesn't have space for.
Right. No, I agree.
So for me, the idea of embracing or considering or, landing in atheism is not a big deal for me. And it wouldn't scare me if I did.
Right. No, we've had Jeff Turner on the show.
Yeah.
I've known Jeff for a good long time. And, when he wrote that book, The Atheistic Theist, he's talking about exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, listen, I can hold these things in tension,
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily.
Well, who isn't really an atheist in some form or another, right?
Well, when he went through his deconstruction, he was like,
yeah, I mean,
I'm done. The whole thing is over. I'm out. And the more interesting part of his story for me is that he continued to pastor for a good long while. And what was interesting, the way that Jeff put it and the way that he talked about it was he found a way to be honest about all of that.
Yes, that's
because like it didn't preclude him from talking about Jesus.
Right.
It didn't preclude him from discussing the things that the actual gospel preaches. You can still preach the Sermon on the Mount and hold to a and hold to an atheistic point of view. The Sermon on the Mount still works.
Yeah, as just a human being, right?
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking as you were talking, because we've had at least one. What's the word I'm looking for, John? I was going to say one avowed, but that's not the right word. But we had Hemant Mehta on the show, and he's the friendly atheist, and it always struck me. Here's what strikes me about that, and I'm not sure why I'm on this train of thought. This is where I'm at. That people who don't believe in God and who still try to live morally upright lives are even. I mean, to me, that's pretty courageous.
Right.
There are those people who, for whom
they certainly don't have a dog, right?
Yeah. Well, they don't have any of this external stuff going, hey, you have to. They just go, well, that's just the right thing to do. I'm just going to treat people this way. I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to lie, cheat, and steal. And they get really offended when you try to imply that outside of religion or outside of a concept of God, that people don't know how to live right.
Well, I think we almost have to get outside of our concepts of God, particularly in American religion, to have it be authentic. I mean, because are you doing this out of fear that God's going to do this? Or are you doing this out of a certain creed?
Right.
That you hold, therefore the creed compels you, and it's not just a genuine altruistic thing that's come from your heart. It's something that's wrapped up in some other condition or obligation or tenet,
Yeah. So it's either the threat of punishment or the promise of some reward, right? So I don't find a whole lot of merit in that one either. Hey, if I'm a good little boy, when it's all said and done, I get my crown of jewels and I get to go walk on the street. Well, there's altruism doesn't hardly come into play there.
Don't forget the virgins, man. Don't forget the virgins.
Oh, well, yeah. I just always assume that's going to backfire somehow. I always assume that's like, do you remember that movie, was it Bedazzled, John? Remember that one with, was that one?
I remember it. I don't know if I can tell you anything about that movie.
Come on, the one with that weird dude.
Brendan Fraser, right?
Yeah, Brendan Fraser. The only reason this ever comes up in conversations with people is because I think it's hilarious that he makes these little deals with the devil, and the devil always keeps his end of the bargain, but just in really weird ways. Like he's like, I want to be rich and I want to be famous and I want to be blah. So he like wakes up and he's a like Colombian drug lord. It's like, well, you're rich, you're famous, you're like... Anyway. That's always how I assume that these sort of promises that religion has given us, they always kind of come out. You know what I mean? Because something you said early on was that the promises of evangelical Christianity never panned out.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you're ever part of the Word of Faith movement. I was. And I was promised, that all I had to do was sign on the dotted line, tithe X, Y, and Z dollars, and God was obligated to pay me back 7-fold, 10-fold, whatever fold it was. And I'm still broke as a joke. So,
right. There it is.
It's all just empty promises, right?
True. Yeah. And because it doesn't work. I mean, it all doesn't pan out. And when you see it pan out for other people, that's not always as authentic or God inspired as you think it is. I mean, you see all these. I mean, I can list a good portion of the mega pastors that I once aspired to, and they've all got some serious problems in their life that are a direct ramification of them pursuing, pastoral celebrity.
Right.
So this idea that we have in our American Christian culture that the ones who are truly under the umbrella of God's blessing are the mega pastors and one Sunday we had 2 baptisms and the next Sunday we had 5,000 of them. All these big stories that you hear, not everything that glitters is gold.
Hey, that's for sure.
Well, there's definitely that cult of personality feeling, right? When you get into these mega churches. I mean, there's this level of egotism that comes along with this need for validation, which I think we all have. And I think, I'll even go as far maybe to say as in the beginning of their, whatever they were doing, how they were moving, they were probably doing this for more healthy reasons, I would say, potentially. I mean, I don't know them, so I don't know, but it seems like, but at some point you gotta beat last week, right? So every week's got to be better. Yep. How are you going to hold on to those thousands and thousands of people? And I think, I can't remember who we were talking to when we talked about that. Basically, this system is like the ultimate Ponzi scheme anyway. It's like, that you got the pastor at the top and he's promising this next level so much return as long as they can get the level below them to give them their return. And I think a lot of these people that you hear and talk about how great God was for them and how much reward they got, they probably just got in at the beginning of this Ponzi scheme, and at the lower levels, us lay people who are trying to enter into this idea of returning sevenfold, we just got into it too damn late. And there just wasn't any money left to be passed down to us. And then their response to us is, well, you just didn't have enough faith.
Yeah, you just got to get people in your downline, John. I mean,
I know. I got to get people below me willing to add money to the system.
It's the church as an Amway model, got to get people in the downline. But it's unfortunate. What I hadn't really intended to talk about Christian celebrity, but let's talk about that for a second, because I think again, the more we talk, the more I feel like we're similar. Early in my evangelical days, I had similar aspirations. So the first thing I would say is I recognize the temptation. I don't mean to shit on these people who have these aspirations, because man, they are super tempting to have. I mean, who doesn't like the adulation that comes with, hey, good message today. You really did a good job. You were anointed of God. And I had delusions of some sort of platform and stage as well.
Yep.
Did you find that to be a little bit intoxicating, a little bit seductive?
Believe it or not, that was really the whole 80% of the reason why I transitioned out of the ELCA into a conservative. And I spiritually rationalize it.
Sure, of course.
Right.
Everything that you do within Christianity really is an emotional decision that you spiritually rationalize.
Yeah.
And for me, it was, I saw these, this was right when, the Purpose Driven Life book and the Purpose Driven Church was just coming out. And I got a taste of that. And I actually was flown out to Community Church of Joy, mega church out there, was asked to speak. They were, attending 3,000 people on a Sunday. And man, I got a whiff of that, a little bit in my nose, sniffed that up, and it's like, whoa, I got to have me some of that. And then I surveyed the ELCA. I was like, we're not putting this stuff out. And I started to understand that a lot of these churches were Southern Baptist in flavor. They had those tenets, those basic tenets. You've got the community, Saddleback, and then, the Willow Creek and all those, churches are like, wow, so what are they doing different? Their tenets were different. And then I spiritually rationalized, well, that's because they believe the word is God, and yet you have to repent, and have establish a relationship with Jesus, blah, blah, blah. And so I thought, okay, that's the reason why all these churches are like that. So I made the transition out thinking that, boy, once I did that and dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's of what really is the real faith that God blesses, then I'll get all these things going. And of course, as none of that really ever happens, only for a few people. And then in your personal life, it doesn't happen, all the things that you think are going to happen in terms of overcoming sin and being a better this and having a better wife and better relationship, better marriage, blah, blah, blah. You play it out long enough and you just realize, wow, this was all just crap. It's like you come off of a drug, you come off the drug, you're like, oh, wow, that's not good.
Yeah. And then there's a crash, right? I mean, I had a pretty severe, come to Jesus moment, I guess, literally. like Jesus wasn't in the building, man. Whatever was going on there was all self-aggrandizing. It was all little mini empire building. And again, I don't mean to crap on those people who are engaged in that, except at whatever point they're knowledgeable of that and they go anyway. You know what I mean? I think we all get to a point where there's going to be a crisis point where we're asked to make some assessments, and some willingly or ignorant, whatever, blissful ignorance, they go along anyway, knowing full well that it's not working. But yeah, the the temptation is very real, and like you said, it happens for a minuscule amount of people. Although it entraps, I would say, a whole lot more than that, who are still striving and fighting to try and find that level of success, Well,
I mean, listen, and then, for me, somewhere along the way, I stood back and I realized it wasn't because of the faith that they were successful. It wasn't because they had aligned with some key faith that God blesses. It had nothing to do with it. It was just that they were successful. They were successful entrepreneurs. They were successful speakers. They were successful leaders in a very non-faith way. And they could have gone into a church and done that. They could have gone into another company and done that. They could have gone anywhere and done the same thing. It just happened to be inside of a church. So it really had nothing to do with faith.
Right. I think a lot of people don't really recognize that about the Joel Osteens of the world, or the, whoever else you want to talk with. You're right. They would have been successful in whatever venue they chose.
Absolutely.
Because that was that's in their personality. They just happen to choose to be evangelical megachurch pastors. That's just where their path led them. But if they were, I'm trying to pick, if they ran a Fortune 500 company, their company would be one of the top. Yeah. Because that was their drive. If they started a business instead of a church, it'd be the same thing.
I mean, there's no way that a guy like Joel Osteen administers a church the size he does, as successfully as he does, without having some particular skill set that's unique to a CEO type. I mean, say what you will about him. I have my issues with him. I don't think he's a bad guy. But his church is every bit a Fortune 500 business, way more so than any kind of model for ministry. But all that being said, religion gives you that other thing, though. Don't you notice? Don't you think, though? Like, okay, so it's one thing to go out there and try and be successful at something, and when that fails, it's bad, right? Okay, we feel bad about ourselves. If you go out and try to have a successful ministry and fail, you not only feel bad about yourself, but now I have to wonder about the authenticity of my faith. Like the legitimacy of my calling, all that stuff that comes along with it, that I think makes it 10 times worse when you fail as a pastor than if you just went out and sucked at business.
For sure. And, the other enticing thing about doing, taking an entrepreneur and putting him in a spiritual tent is the spiritual rationalization of it all. That just pours gasoline on the ego to be able to say, okay, we're doing this. And now I can spiritually rationalize just about anything I do. And then, of course, like you said, when it all comes tumbling down, the weight is not just a human failure. Now it's a faith failure.
Yeah. Or God is displeased with me.
God hates me. That's right. God has turned his back on me or her back on me and blah, blah, blah. And it's a catastrophe of the heart, mind, and soul.
Yeah. I'm so sympathetic to people who go through this stuff and feel the weight of that come down on them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it takes a heavier toll than it ever should. But before we get too far down the road and we don't do this, let's talk about your book, your most recent one in particular. Let's talk about the stupid shit book. I just like saying it. So it's kind of fun, but Give us a little snapshot of what that deals with.
Well, the contents of the book started out really several years ago. I had started to do just this little Sunday morning thing on Facebook where I just, opened up with a sentence. Here's a message you probably won't hear at church this morning. And then I would pick a topic or something and then write a piece on it, a little essay on it. And, it wasn't really anything intentional. It wasn't, just doing whatever came to my desire to write. And then people started to like it, and then they started to look forward to it, every Sunday. And I couldn't do them every Sunday, but as much as I could. And then, I just kept on doing it for a few years. And then someone, maybe, I don't remember, 6-8 months ago, something like that, said, hey, man, it'd be great if you compiled all those together, stuck them in a book that we could all refer to and look at, and we could sit on them and think about them, blah, blah, blah. I was like, wow, that's not a bad idea. So it really came out of that. So it's 80 plus of those essays, and it covers all kinds of stuff. Those topics are everywhere you can think of in terms of their spiritual application. And but the heart of it is just to really talk about things And, those messages were really to talk about stuff that you're just not going to hear probably in your average corner church on a Sunday morning. There are going to be things that are going to challenge the status quo. There are going to be things that really push the edges of faith and what it means to believe and all that kind of stuff. So that's how the book came about.
I think, I've been at a point where I've done some similar stuff on Facebook where, I kind of, when I stepped out of the church world, it was a point of like, well, these are things that I wanted to say, but I didn't feel like I could. So it's actually partially where the title of this podcast came from. This is not church. Is like I would post these pretty quick little things about things within the church and saying, and this is not church. And it would be something like how the church doesn't allow women to preach, right? And then I would, give my 2 cents on that. So I completely understand this idea of wanting to, I don't know if rock the boat's the right word, but definitely want to push back a little bit on some of the stuff the church kind of gets stuck in, I guess, in their typical Sunday morning sermons that you hear. You can walk into any church probably within this country and get a pretty similar sermon pretty consistently. And it seems like they're safe, or at the same time at a level of scaring the shit out of you, so you want to keep coming back, so you're connected with God and you have your right path to heaven and all that, right? I guess where I'm going with this is just as you're writing these stupid shit that people say in church. I mean, was there like a direction you were going, or were these just kind of popping up weekly for you?
Yeah, they're very random. I mean, they don't have a beginning and end to them in terms of the collection of them.
Right.
They're very random. They're just stuff that would come up in my mind,
Yeah.
As I wrote them. But they really are thematically connected in the sense that, this is just stuff that you're just not going to hear typically. These are things that challenge. These are things that are out of bounds, in church world. These are areas where, one of them is about prayer and just, in my mind, the ridiculousness of prayer and what we made prayer into, and what our expectations are of prayer, and it was one of the most favorite ones that ever got out there. It's in the book. It's like one of the first entries. But recently, I just put a quote, into a meme kind of thing from the book that was on another section about prayer, and it was talking about just stop praying and stop. Quoting the Bible at people, take, your, anyway, it's all about, this idea of this, it's about this addiction to prayer and addiction to quoting, the Bible to people, and, how what we need now is not prayer and more Bible quoting, but what we need now is just people of love doing loving things for the sake of love, in an altruistic way. That's what we really need. That was the gist of the quote. And I swear to God, I mean, when you take the pacifier of prayer out of the typical Christian's mouth, man, they just scream the idea that, you don't want me to pray? You want me to stop? And then they start quoting the Bible. And I'm like, and so these things, these entries, it still surprises me how some of them trigger Christianity, even progressive Christians, to think outside of, to actually really give good examination to why do they believe what they believe,
right?
And what are you actually saying when you say that you believe these things? Do you realize what you're really the core of what these things mean? When you say that, well, there's power in prayer, and prayer does this, and prayer does that. Well, okay, let's talk about people who prayer hasn't done shit for,
right?
What was wrong with them? Was God just holding his back or her back and just said, what, I'm just not going to deal with this one right now? But people don't think about that, man. They just get hook, line, and sinker. They just get on the ride and they lock themselves in. They just, they're just, and man, when you pull that out of the mouth a little bit, when you take that little pacifier, you take that little security blanket away, man, they just come untied. Just out of this example that I've given you in terms of this meme that I just put up last week, 90% of the people totally get it. They're like, I know exactly what Chris is saying. But then you've got 10% of people just determined to misunderstand it, determined to find a way to escape from it and to be able to back away from the truth that's within it. And sometimes it still surprises me, but that's what those essays really do. I mean, and I meant for them to be almost like an art gallery, where you go through each one of them and then you sit there and you look at it and you page through it as if you're just, it's word art in the sense of not word that's art, like visual, but meaningful. And so far people have really been impacted by the book. I had one lady reach out to me. She said, I read through a few of them, and she listened. I've never had this response before for anything I've written. She said, I had to schedule an appointment with my counselor the next day because she was impacted by what she had read.
Negatively?
And it was a positive impact.
Okay.
But she said, I had to schedule a therapy session with my therapist to help me just unwind what I just read. I was like, wow. So, I'm happy about that because it's a positive way, but
it sounds like an endorsement for the back of the book.
Yeah. Well, it's already published. So
like this one, when you do your second edition, you can revise with some revised. Hey, I read this book and immediately made an appointment with my therapist.
Yeah, I know.
I read this book and went straight away to slap my pastor.
That's right.
Well, your conversation on prayer kind of reminds me of a meme that Derek Day put up that talks about prayer, and it's an interesting meme. I'll try to describe it the best I can. So it's an image of like a gazelle being chased by a cheetah, right? And they have these little text bubbles above each one of them, and the gazelle is praying to God, please God, just save me from dying from this cheetah. And the cheetah's one is, dear God, please let me find food for my family or whatever today. Both legitimate, honest prayers, right? Yeah. But one of them is not going to get their prayer answered. Yeah. It's just absolutely not going to happen. And that's kind of where he's getting with this.
One football team is going to lose the game.
Right. Oh, yeah.
One person who's got cancer is going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it comes back to that, the phrase that, I'm kind of holding on to from when we talked to Jonathan Foster. And that's, if you are intellectually honest with yourself, you have to look at this and say, okay, I have been sold a bill of goods when it comes to prayer, because I've always been told growing up that if I just had enough faith, if I just believed enough in this God that's in this heavenly place, that he or she or they are going to save me or give me what I'm asking for or do what I ask them to do. And if we were intellectually honest, we'd realize that doesn't happen hardly at all that I can see. I mean, for every one prayer that seems to be answered, we can give you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prayers that are not, right?
Well, see, and the toxicity of conservative evangelicalism is that they always have an escape hatch. Whenever something gets to be an area where, it reveals the crap that is being spewed, they always have an escape hatch. Well, God's ways aren't our ways.
Right.
There's all, and then when you try to come out of evangelicalism, you're so brainwashed by it that when you come out of it, there's a tremendous amount of fear that you're backsliding, and that, oh God, maybe hell is really real, and all this stuff that I've been taught, maybe that's really real, and I'm backsliding, and there's so many escape hatches for conservative evangelicalism to tie you into that thing, and just when you get out of prison, of it, you're actually the one who put yourself back in it, because you're so afraid of being free because you haven't been free for a long time. And, but yeah, and then I'm glad that I have, come away from that, but man, it so impassions me to think about the seduction of people who are still in that. And a good portion of it is because, the escape hatches and the way it chains you is just diabolical. I mean, and like there was the one lady who reached out to me recently about my book. I said, hey, let's have a telephone conversation, because it's going to be hard for us to get into all this, over the internet. And so we talked on the phone, and she asked me all these questions, and I explained it to her, and I gave, answers that she understood and she agreed with. And she said, oh, yeah, that's it. And she was totally at peace, and she's ready to move forward. And then 2 days later, I see her back on there, going back to all the things that, and I understand it's a process of, kind of coming and going and, walking forward, one step forward, 2 steps back, all that stuff. But I found that a lot of that is out of fear. A lot of it's out of fear, and it's because of these escape hatches. It's because of the way that evangelicalism and toxic Christianity they have you to where, it's almost, and for some people, impossible to get out because either the cost is too high or the fear is too strong. I mean, it's just, I'm trying to say something. I don't think I'm putting good words to it, but
no, you are. Yeah.
No, I agree. I understand what you're saying. I'm in the process of finishing up a book myself. I'm about 2 chapters away, have been for about 2 months now, John. I can't get it. No, anyway, but I actually went back and rewrote a chapter because I lost a whole bunch of stuff, but that's an aside. And what I had done in the intervening weeks and months since I started writing this thing was I had watched, what's her name now? Leah Remini's documentary about Scientology. Have you seen this?
Okay. Yes, I have.
It's called Scientology in the Aftermath. And I'd seen it a little bit before, and I'm rewatching it, and I'm dumbfounded. I am just dumbfounded by the parallels. And I'm like,
it's exactly the same.
My God, this is evangelical Christianity.
It is. It is
maybe a softer sell on some points, but the tactics are the same.
Yeah.
The manipulation's the same. The controls are the same. And what you just said about the risk being too high, if that doesn't raise red flags for you or anybody about being involved in a cult-ish organization, that you risk losing everything if you step away or question or whatever. And I was so deep in a few of these churches that I was, a part of it. I wasn't probably going to lose family, but I was certainly risking livelihood.
Oh, absolutely.
My income was going to go bye-bye.
Yeah.
My reputation was going to get shot to hell.
Yeah.
I did end up losing my job. I did end up losing lots of friendships. We did suffer financially. My reputation was, damaged in the short term. Yeah. And it was all because I dared to question the orthodoxy of this one particular institution that I was a part of. And I'm like, so when you say stuff like that, it immediately reminds me that, we are dealing with an organization that is self-serving and so much so that it will do what it takes to hold itself together, even at the cost of human lives.
Well, again, if they were, again, I'm going to keep using this word, if they were just intellectually honest with themselves, they would see some of the stuff that's going on in these churches that are, if they were seeing this in any other situation, they would be yelling cult so damn fast.
Yeah.
I mean, just this idea of, isolation, right? You isolate your children from the outside world so they can't get information from anybody but people within the church.
Did you read my chapter?
No.
That's crazy.
But, I look back at my time in church and I realize that every single one of my friends at that time
they were church
also
friends.
Went to the same damn church that I went to.
Of course they did. Yeah.
Drinking the same effing Kool-Aid that I'm drinking, speaking the same damn shit that I'm speaking.
Using little jargon in your little special language. Yeah.
And God forbid you ever stepped outside that group of people, right? And how quickly did they shame you? You got to be in the world, not of it, John. You got to be in the world, not of it.
Yeah,
you're on that slippery slope, buddy.
You're on a slippery slope. You're stepping away from the faith. I just saw you. I saw you go out and buy that Judas Priest album. What the hell are you doing?
That's so funny.
It's like, I'm just trying to hear some good music. What are you talking about?
Then why Judas Priest? I mean,
sorry.
I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you. Oh man, are you familiar with IHOP in Kansas City? You know much about that church, Mike Bickle?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So if as an audience member, if you're listening to this and you're not familiar, I'm about to throw some shade because Mike Bickle deserves it. But that organization is culty. I'm not saying they're a cult, but they are cultish, man. Especially if you get into the inner circle of it and you actually like go on, like become part of their school and get like, so one of the things that you have to do when you decide to go, the whole church is predicated on the fact that if they would dedicate themselves to prayer 24/7, they could bring about the end times faster. That's Mike Bickle's whole point, is that we're going to usher in the end times through constant, fervent 24/7 prayer. Right? Because darn it, that's what has to happen.
For sure.
But I only bring that up because, first of all, you have to have listened to all of Mike Bickle's teachings. You have to have bought all of his DVDs and all of his CDs, and you have to really be able to know those things by heart, as much or more so than Scripture. But it was really funny. Some of the stories that have come out of people having left that organization are pretty heartbreaking. There's been a few pretty good sized scandals that have gone there. There's been some shady things that have happened behind the scenes. So when those stories begin to break, you start to see some of those control mechanisms come out. But one of the most ironic things I've ever seen in my life was a clip of Mike Bickle standing in front of his people and teaching them how to recognize a cult. As he's going through his list of like 10 ways you know you're in a cult, I'm like, you do that. Oh shit, you do that. Oh, Mike, are you hearing yourself? Like, you do these things. Yeah. And so I already had a sort of a predisposition against him a little bit. I just think that the organization is wonky and weird. But then the first time I actually saw a video clip of Brian Zond was on stage at IHOP in Kansas City. That's where they held the Monster God debate with Mike in the audience with all of his students there as Brian Zond and Dr. Michael Brown debated penal substitutionary atonement theory. And so I'm like, I've known Mike a good long time. I'm like, man, you guys do not seem like you're cut from the same cloth. But anyway, all of that was an aside because what you say about those sorts of practices always reminds me of those organizations.
I know this sometimes comes across as being judgmental of some of these things, but here's where I come from on all this. This conservative evangelical thing that I gave some of my best years of my life to was a complete freaking waste of time. I know there was a lot of people that benefited from my ministries in different ways, but in terms of who I was and what I was doing with my life and where I was spiritually and as a father, as a husband, it was just terrible in its impact. And then you just look back and go, God, if I just had never gotten involved in that, how things, would have been different, in terms of just who I am and how I see the world and see people and how I carry myself as a person. And then, now where I'm at, as I continue to move, into the spiritual journey, and I don't mean this to be judgmental or whatever, but I just look at so many things within Christianity and go, that is such a waste. What the hell, are we doing debating atonement theories? To me, I get the value of that, but I'm just like, are we ever going to come up with something amicable with all these people and these theories and stuff like that? Is it ever going to pan out to something where everybody goes, oh, now we all agree?
Oh, yeah. Now, you're right.
You're right. And then, I think of like, and then even like, and where I'm at, and this is, I could land somewhere else 3 weeks from now. I don't know. But, in terms of where I'm at, like with even the Bible, I think, and I may regret saying this, but to me, where I'm at, if you have to quote the Bible to justify your faith and to make it legitimate and to have a reason for what you believe and what you do, I think something's, for me, amiss with that. Because I agree. All I need to do, and this is the language that I use right now, but all I need to do is look at the mind of Christ within me. That's it. I can know Jesus far better in myself than I could ever know him through a book or through a church or through someone else's theology. And I feel like if I'm gonna just keep moving in my faith, the place for me to look is not within the Bible and trying to dig into that more and figure out how to ebb and move the way I want it to move, but to look inside of me and find, the light that's been placed within all people and the mind of Christ and this thing that connects us all in the universe together, to look within that. And that will not only be my source, but that will help me to see everything else in maybe a better perspective than I would otherwise. Yeah. And so for me, and, I don't know how I got off onto this, but part of what this book does is it challenges all those things that we hold so close to our souls from our Christian upbringing.
Yeah, and it's necessary. I mean, it's one of those things that John has used this phrase a couple of times. It's intellectual honesty. Yeah. One of those things that pushed me and sort of drove me over a cliff was I just couldn't. I couldn't stand the cognitive dissonance anymore. And so I know John did this, and I've done this a couple of times. But I just put the Bible away for a while.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? Just need to walk away.
Yeah, coming full circle to me is that atheism capacity, is important to be able to go so far as to say, you know what, I'm willing to trust that walking away from everything is still going to be okay.
You mentioned that. So in this thing called deconstruction, for a lot of people, it's something they chose. There are a lot of people for whom deconstruction was just thrust upon them. Absolutely. And although I still think there's a choice to take the red pill or the blue pill. Right. I do think there are people who are choosing now to live in blissful ignorance, even though they know in the back of their mind.
Absolutely.
And they just, but for some like me, there was a crisis point, but my deconstruction was pretty deliberate. And I remember sitting across, this is something I recounted a few times, but I remember sitting across the table from my then pastor, this church I'm on staff on. We're both building this thing. We want to have this big church and with a big, yada, 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 all the trappings that come along with that. And all of a sudden I'm not on the same page anymore. And I told them that I was, I think the terminology I used was fairly bellicose. I'm like, I'm blowing the thing up. I'm just going to take a blowtorch to the whole fucking thing and see what survives, and if that means Jesus goes bye-bye too, then bye-bye Jesus, and in some ways, Jesus did go bye-bye. White evangelical American Rambo Jesus went away, because he was never real anyway. But there was this sense of sort of stepping off a ledge though. You know what I mean? And to his credit, the guy that I was having the meal with and having the conversation with, he was with me to a point. I mean, he understood what I was doing, but the implication was, don't go too far. I'm like, I don't even know what too far means. Let's find out. But it's just such a, I don't know. It's like you say, the dissonance gets to be great enough. At some point, I think for everybody that they have to make a choice. To either just keep closing your eyes to it or turn a different direction. For some, that means turning the whole thing off for a while. Scriptures are problematic. If you're honest with yourself, this to be true. I'm not saying they're not worthwhile or good or worth the trouble, but they are trouble. So, I do love talking to those guys who are like, no. It all harmonizes perfectly. Everything in here makes sense.
It's never going to. And that's my point about the Bible. It's never going to. I don't care if you're, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're progressive, you're anything. It's never going to harmonize. You're never going to get the Bible to justify exactly everything you want it to justify. You can't do it.
Right.
That's all the more evidence that is not the source and that's not to be the place. That's not where we're supposed to be going to find foundation and, justification and, sustenance and grounding for our faith. That's just not where we're supposed to go.
Right. Well, and even the Bible itself, when I do teach this, I still pastor a small church and, I teach this in my church. I'm like, listen, the Bible doesn't make these claims for itself. We make these claims for the Bible. Yeah. The Bible does never say. In fact, if you really want to be honest, What does Jesus say about the scribes and the Pharisees? That they pore over the scriptures. They think in them they're going to find life, but they won't find it there. So even the Bible says about itself through Jesus that there's no life in the words. That the best it can say is that the scriptures are useful. Okay, I'll buy that. I'll buy that, Paul.
So is my recent edition of Playboy magazine.
Right. Yeah. It's inspired and useful. I don't have the most recent one. I have to go look through my collection.
And you see over and over again that the people who throw out verses on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, 90% of the time, they are using those verses to defend their version of hate, not their version of love.
Yeah.
Their version of separation.
Yeah, who they can exclude.
Their version of exclusion. Their version of... And so, people like Nat and I, and I'm assuming probably you as well, I got really good at going, okay, you're going to throw a verse, I'll throw a verse, right? Yeah. And I throw one in their face that says exactly the opposite of what they're saying, right? But you don't see a lot of people who are on this side of like, hey, how about we just follow Jesus and what Jesus told us? You don't see them very often throwing out Bible verses saying, see, this is why I'm right. This is why Jesus tells us to love everybody. We just say, hey, I read the Bible like you do, and this is the conclusion I came, that I'm just supposed to love everybody. And I'm just going to live in that world. I don't need the Bible to explain that to me. Jesus has basically said, hey, these are the commandments I give you, or the commandment I give you, right? And I'm just going to move forward with that. I don't need to throw Bible verses down your throat. I don't need to post every other day about, what Jesus or Paul or whoever says about this. I'm just going to live this life.
It's definitely a crutch.
And just see how it pans out. Yeah. I don't understand, I guess, the need, this idea that we can use the Bible to separate and exclude and make people feel less than, right?
Yeah.
It just seems, again, I don't want to keep using this word, this phrase, intellectual honesty, but I mean, it just seems if we take a step back for just 1 second and realize that all we're doing is exactly the opposite of what Jesus has asked us to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, in one of the articles or essays, it was actually a full article. I think I wrote it one time, but I broke it down to the essay. Is in there is the title is maybe this is the real reason you believe being LGBTQ is a sin. And what I do in that essay is talk about how that, you could take a look at the 6 clobber passages, the passages that people use to condemn the LGBT community. And you can, and with just as much faith and love of Jesus in the Bible, you can interpret those passages completely the opposite way. That you can actually use those passages to affirm the LGBT community instead of to condemn them. You can do it biblically, faithfully, loving Jesus just the way other people do. But the real reason why you take it that way is because you want to. Everybody, I think, interprets the Bible the way they want to. If I want to be more loving and more affirming and more caring and more universal in my faith and blah, 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 I can do that with the Bible. If I want to be a jackass and a racist and a hateful, murdering person, I can do that too. So what people don't like to hear is that the reason why you believe about something and you use the scripture to do it is because you've made an emotional decision that you're going to hate this group or do this or be angry about this, and you're just spiritualizing it, and you're going to use the Bible to do that as if it's authoritative and God appointed for you to be the asshole that you are.
No, it's all just reaffirming what you already believe, right? It's just confirmation bias. It's whatever you want to call it, but it's like because I think I'm not sure it's unique to Brian Zahn, but I heard him say it first that the Bible's a Rorschach test, and what you think it says more about you than it.
Yeah.
And I think that's 100% true. Like you said, if you want to find, an inclusive gospel, it's all over the Bible.
Absolutely.
But you have to do some cherry picking,
Well, and everybody.
Everybody does. Of course they do. That's what, I love that. You just cherry pick the Bible. I'm like, yeah, we all do, man.
You have to.
You have to. The difference is you're cherry picking based on your biases, and I am too. My biases happen to be that I feel like Like God is a God of love and inclusion and acceptance. And I'm going to read the Bible through that filter.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest about the fact that I read the Bible through that filter, which means I'm going to necessarily take some of those things that show up in the Bible. I'm either going to go, nah, or I'm either going to like stratify them at a lower, place of importance than I am to the words of Jesus that say something else. But that whole flattening out of the Bible thing, you and I were raised up in evangelical Bible schools and stuff like that. So didn't we learn that skill, right? Of like the Bible is the inerrant word of God. Therefore, it all has equal value and all has equal merit. And there was just this flattening of scripture that said, basically the words of Job were on the same level as the words of Jesus. And I could go, well, he gives and takes away, doggone it. And that was one of those places of cognitive dissonance that I just had to wrestle with and say, no, that can't be so.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, with no other book that that anybody would say is inerrant or without issues, no other book would people say, okay, I'm just going to blindly accept all of this, even with its inconsistencies within itself. This seems to be the only book ever written that we blindly accept it, regardless of its inconsistencies, regardless of its contradicting itself time and time again. We just turn a blind eye, we as in the church.
But that's the rationalization that Chris is talking about. That's
right.
You've made an emotional decision and now you're going to spiritually rationalize what you already believe. I think that's powerful, by the way, Chris.
The spiritual gymnastics that you have to do to make this work is just exhausting.
I'm tired just talking about it. It makes me tired just thinking about it. I took a note, by the way, Chris, because that phrase you used early on, and you've talked about it a couple of times, is powerful, man. That emotional decision that you then spiritually rationalize. That's a big takeaway for me. I'm going to chew on that for a little bit.
Absolutely, me too.
Man, I tell you what, there's so much. I'm going to order your book for sure. If for no other reason than the title and the cover. The cover's great, by the way. If you need to buy this book just to have it on your bookshelf, so someone can go,
what is that?
A roll of toilet paper on the front of that dude's book?
Yeah.
You can go, well, actually, you should probably check it out.
It's interesting because I had to have somebody design that. I had the cover in terms of, I knew I wanted toilet paper. I knew the name and the subtitle and everything about it, had that all decided. But the first lady who I wanted to design the cover, she refused to do it because she didn't. I told everybody who was going to be a part of the book, I want you to be 100% into this book.
For sure.
I'm going to give you chapters to read. I'm going to tell you who I am, blah, blah, blah. And if you can't get on board with that, then I don't want you to be a part of the book. This first lady's like, I don't think I can design this for you. I had an editor say the same thing. The editor said no, I just can't get on board with this. Finally, I found a lady in Canada who designed that. That was the first design that she submitted. And my favorite part is that it looks like shit finger paint. Where you see the shit there, where it says shit on. That's shit finger paint. I was like, oh my God. That is brilliant. That is brilliant. It should get some cover award. I swear to God.
It should. No, it's a great cover. I like it's arresting. You know what I mean? It's one of those things you go, even if I didn't know anything, I'd be like, okay, I need to read this book. I need to find out, what this is about. I'm learning a lot more about, book covers and things like that as we talk about some things. And I'm like, I don't know. That one stands out. Who was the person who designed that?
Her name is Valerie. I'd have to look inside the cover, but she's in Canada, and
that's cool. She did a great job
about it. Yeah, really did a great job on that.
So was it self-published or did you go through a publisher?
Yeah. It's self-published on Amazon. So anybody who wants it, just go on Amazon, look up the name. When you look up the name, do not use the asterisk because it won't come up. You got to use the full. Yeah,
I actually just typed in your name and came up with all your books, and it's there. Yeah. But you can't type in the profanity.
You do actually type in the profanity, so it is stupid shit. SHIT.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, if you use the asterisk, it won't show for some stupid reason. But
that's weird.
So, and the truth that will wipe you clean. That's the subtitle.
That's some quilted 2-ply truth right there, because you're gonna want or like a wet nap. That's awesome.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. If you haven't read the book, man, support independent writers. Reach out to Chris. I'm sure he'd send you a signed copy, right?
Sure.
Or should I not? Should I lie about stuff like that? I should have asked you first. We'll see. But it's available on Amazon. I'm sure where their fine books are sold. You need to make sure and support guys like this. If for no other reason, then it'll challenge you. And I think we're all in a place where we know we need to be challenged from time to time. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to challenge our own preconceived ideas and notions. And yeah, there might be some stuff in there that would cause you to go, interesting. So definitely check out the book. If you're not friends, well, you probably won't be able to be friends with you on Facebook. You have like 4,999 friends. So
yeah, but they can once they and I found out they just follow then.
Yeah, and you're not doing a public figure page. You're not falling down that rabbit hole. Don't do it, man.
I probably got some people have told me I need to do that, but I'm like, I don't know.
You know what sucks about that? And maybe this is a better conversation for offline, but if you're listening and you're thinking about converting your personal page to a public figure page, what happens is that, because Facebook monetizes those, man, your readership, unless you're really active and you're willing to play their game, it will fall off. I get almost
public.
Yeah, if you go public figure, because all of a sudden they want you, because now you have the ability to boost posts and to pay for advertising and do all this other stuff. And if you don't, you get buried in that stuff. So I had several thousand people on my public figure page, and I got, so much less traction than I ever did just on my personal page. Of course, I don't post them nearly as much as I used to anymore. But yeah, no, but you, Chris is one of those guys. For me, you were like Jason Elam and Jeff Turner and some other guys that I met. I became aware of you more through Facebook than anything else.
Yeah.
And you were just putting out solid content pretty consistently. And so I'm going to follow this guy and see what he has to say. So if you want something popping up in your news feed that's going to challenge you and that's going to make you think, man, follow Chris on Facebook. I'm not sure if you have other social media stuff like Instagram that you do as well.
Yeah, there's Instagram and stuff.
Twitter.
I don't do Twitter, but Instagram.
Yeah. I can't quite get the handle of Twitter.
I've got a pretty good Pornhub account you can check out.
Oh my goodness gracious.
John, you're supposed to be like, what's that? I don't even know what?
Yeah, let's just say back in college, they used to call me Tripod Man.
Okay. I'm going to stop this right here, John. I think we have gotten as far down this road as we need to go. So I'm gonna wind this down. Encourage you to go support Chris, buy his book, in spite of the Pornhub comment, or maybe because of. I don't know. This is the judgment-free zone, man. We are not here to judge. So we appreciate you coming, man. Thank you for all of your insights and all the stuff, man. I'm looking forward to reading your book. In fact, I need to. The Leatherbound Terrorism sounds awesome too. I need to probably see if I can score a copy of that somewhere. We didn't even get a chance to talk about that, but maybe next time we can get together and go further down the rabbit hole.
Awesome, man! Such an honor.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch. where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.